we are going to hear about how we would measure the outcomes of such work. And moderating the panel is Ms. Claire Anderson.
Thank you, Dean George. Thank you, and thank you for organizing this conference. It was so much needed. It is so much needed to talk about this. I'm a professor at this university, at the University of St. Thomas. I teach a class on energy and environment. I'm also part of a group of mentors called Global Energy Mentors that is hosted by the University of St. Thomas here. We mentor startup companies in energy. The way I teach energy and environment, I teach it in a sustainable way. We use the encyclical from both Francis to talk about sustainability, which is the approach of the encyclical is say that it's about caring for the environment and caring for humanity. It's not about signing up to the Paris Agreement. It's about how we make our own choices. And when I teach this to my students, it is so natural for them to absorb it, and it is in their DNA this day. It's a new generation, it's a millennial generation that is making this huge change in how we see investments and how we see impacting the rest of the humanity for the next generations. So I am very excited to moderate this panel about investment. I came into adulthood in the 90s when the millennials were not even born. Maybe one or two were being born in the 90s. And I was in finance at that time. I was working for the International Finance Corporation, but I always did finance with a developmental side because the International Finance Corporation is part of the World Bank. So all my calculations and modeling had to do with sustainability and with impact of the less, the poor and to bring development to those countries. But I saw that my generation I saw how greed in my generation had put so much negative effects in humanity. And I see with joy that the new generation, the millennials, are embracing sustainability. Greed is about self-love, and sustainability is about the love for others. It's about the love for humanity. And to see that concept embedded in investments is something very, very refreshing. So it is for me a great pleasure to moderate this panel. We have a phenomenal group of panelists here. I'm so impressed and I so respect them. I think that you're going to benefit so much from what they know and from their experiences. We'll start with Bob Rich, who's more or less a contemporary of mine. Bob is a scientist, entrepreneur, mentor, and angel investor. Bob has a PhD in computer science from UT and a BA in mathematical sciences from Rice. He worked at and founded several companies in the high-tech industry and decided in 2014 to change purpose. Decided to make the world a better place and started Southwest Angel Network to serve startup companies with a social impact. Since 2015, the company grew from 6 angels to 43 and now has 17 projects worth $3.5 million. Thank you, Bob, for being here and contributing to our conference. Jamila Yamani, next to Bob, is also a scientist, being a SIIA and passionate for finding solutions to human problems in a sustainable way. Jamila has a PhD from Yale in chemical engineering, a master's from MIT in chemical engineering, and a BS from UCLA, also in chemical engineering. Jamila worked for Pegasus Capital Partners, private equity fund, that invests exclusively in the sustainability and wellness of spaces, performing due diligence and strategic advice in the science, technology, and engineering focus of decision. Jamila is now a principal at Climate Impact Capital here in Houston, where she targets solutions and pathways to mitigate greenhouse gas growth and to adapt society to the long-term impacts of climate change. Thank you, Jamila, for being here. Victoria, next to Jamila, Victoria Fernandez is a businesswoman and media expert. She is the Chief Market Strategy for Crossmark Global Investment she works in market, she's a market expert and interviews everybody for the media. She's been there since 2012. Victoria holds an MBA from Texas A&M and an MBA from Rice. Amanda, here right next to me, is the Chief Operations Officer for Global Affairs Associates. It's a firm that helps companies make strategic, business-appropriate decisions regarding sustainability. Before that, she worked for SIIA, implementing IKEA's sustainability strategy in North America supply chain. And with this, thank you very much all of you for being here. I will start with the first question. In the first half of 2019, shareholder proposal filings, which is for all those who own shares in the stock exchange, you will receive a shareholder survey, and those surveys go back to being processed, and those are called shareholder proposal filings. They show that continuing the trend that started in 2017, shareholders vote in favor of greater concern at the governance level for environmental and social issues. And in 2019, the letter to the CEOs, Larry Fink, the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, talk about purpose and profits, explaining that with unemployment improving across the globe, a new phenomenon is emerging among employees, not just stakeholders, who expect the company they work for to be purposeful in improving society. He said that over the past year, we have seen some of the world's most skilled employees stage walkouts. That this phenomenon will only grow as millennials occupy increasingly senior positions in business. In a recent survey by Deloitte, millennial workers were asked what the primary purpose of business should be, and 63% more said improving society than those who said generating profit. So, however, when it comes to impact investment, be either through ESGs or MSRIs, or just angel funds that focus on social impact on companies, there is an underlying perception among investors that they will have to give up something in order to have a successful portfolio. It seems that it's either you make an impact or have a good return on investment. What do you have to say about this, and how can this perception be changed? And Victoria, would you like to start with that?
Absolutely.
Answering that question.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We actually did a survey probably about 6-7 months ago with investors of all age groups to determine their familiarity with whether it's ESG, SRI investing, values-based investing, whatever it may be, how interested they are in that, their exposure to that. It was very low for investors over the age of 60, but yet the millennials were very much in tune with this. The problem, though, is that many of them did think the same thing you're thinking. If we're going to invest with our values, which is kind of what our goal is, our name is Crossmark, and we say it's because we're at the intersection of your values and your investments. They had to give up performance. And that's actually how we started with socially responsible investing 20 years ago. A client came to us and said, look, we want to invest, these are the values we want to include, but we know we're going to give up a lot of performance. So we ran a portfolio for them, showed them their performance, showed them the tracking error, right, the difference between their portfolio and their benchmark. And it was so small. At first they thought we'd made a mistake. They said, that can't be. There's no way we can give up all these names and still perform well. But it's the truth. And that's not to say that from quarter to quarter, there's not going to be swings, right? Like some of the names, we actually screen out Amazon because of the mature content. They have their own video processing center and everything where they make their own movies, their own studio movies. So they get screened out. People hear that and they freak out because Amazon's the best performing stock there is. But there's many quarters where it underperforms. It's the same thing with pharmaceuticals, or it can be the same thing with energy-related or carbon-related names that may get screened out. So there are times when you may underperform outperform because you have some names screened out, but you have just as much, the same amount of time that you outperform because you're not holding certain names in the portfolio. So when you look historically, there really is no difference between having everything in the index, all the stocks that the index has, and going in and screening out certain sectors in the portfolio that match your values. Now, saying that doesn't mean you can go screen out 80% of the names and still expect to have the same performance. I mean, there is a point in time where it starts to really increase that tracking error, that drag of your performance. But in general, historically, that is not the case, and that was a misconception that we found almost 70% of investors had doing that.
Jamila, what do you have? I would like the opinion of everybody. Jamila, what would you?
Sure. From a technical perspective, and my work really focuses on environmental sustainability and technology. A large class of investors feel that when we invest in any type of science, there's a huge technological risk. But by and large, a lot of the technologies that we're driving after now are proven out scientifically, and we're really working on scalability and engineering challenges. Engineering challenges are just how we work around whatever it is that we're looking to do, but scientifically the principles are sound. As far as risk goes, there are so many more risks associated with climate change, lack of resources, and fluctuating costs, resiliency, and how we can see cities, municipalities, companies being affected by kind of the climate extremes and other changes that we're witnessing, that it's a better bet to invest in sustainability and in technologies that are driving towards improved efficiency or decreasing carbon or finding alternative bio-based solutions. Those are the better bet at this point, considering the direction that we will go if we continue unchecked.
So maybe I should start off by just reminding you how an angel network works. It's sort of like a friendly version of Shark Tank. We don't try to embarrass the CEOs that have to make the wrong decision and get screwed in front of the national audience. Rather, we have more intelligent discussions. We put together investors and companies and see if we can get companies invested. And the world of this question is a little interesting for angel investing because the rule of thumb is in angel investing, you need to invest in 20 startups to get your money back. Because 15 of them will fail, and 3 or 4 will do sort of okay, and 1 will give a big return. They'll make all your money back. But so the question really is, impact angel investing versus standard angel investing. Is it concessionary to do the impact side? I've seen data that says it's not. It probably depends on the individual decisions being made by the angels. But in our network, we certainly don't view it as a concessionary activity on our part in terms of returns. We expect to have similar returns as other angel networks.
And I would go back in time, and not even that far back, when there were, I think, 2 factors that made it more difficult for the industry. Number 1 is the availability of good quality data. If we take the S&P 500 just as a proxy, last year, 85% of the companies actually published a sustainability report. If you look back in 2011, not that long time ago, it was less than 20%. So we just take that as an example. There is so much more data, good quality data than we had before. It's still not perfect. We still want more. We'll probably talk about that later, but at least we have more than we had 10 years ago. I think at the same time, the early pioneers, just like in any industry, you're struggling. You're trying to figure out, how do I make sense of this data? How do I interpret that in a way so it's meaningful? It's meaningful to my end goals. And I think the industry struggled with that. The pioneers struggled with that, really. And I think that's where that perception comes from, but those 2 things have changed. And I think that's why we can look back now, maybe 5 to 7 years, and applying this new lens or new understanding with our new data that we have, and look at how actually, if you're applying these principles, you can make more money. You can generate alpha.
So you don't need to give up something in order to make a profit with sustainable investments. There's also a perception that projects with environmental and social impact have higher risk, and Jamila touched a little bit on that. Some of these projects are disruptive technology or in innovation nature. It's the increased risk in this, and because touched on that, Jamila. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I think maybe a lot of investors, sometimes are science averse, especially when it comes to technology-based investing. I think overall, a lot of the technological risk that we talk about is a myth. Of course, there's always science that can't be proven out. We've all seen Theranos. We know how that went. But by and large, a lot of the core science has been established. And that engineering challenge, I mean, this is innovative mankind. And the engineering challenges that we have overcome over the past 100 years, thousands of years, there's no reason that we can't continue to do that. And we do continue to do that. So when we see companies that come to us and the first thought is, no, that's impossible. That's not true. Things are possible. You just have to kind of prove them out and understand the scalability, find customers that are interested, and overcome that perception of technological risk.
Both from an investor point of view, from putting your own money into these companies, how do you measure risk and hedge against risk?
So angel investing is just full of risk. When you have 75% of the companies fail, that's pretty risky. So we spend a lot of energy before we invest trying to assess the risk. Can this company get successful? Can they get profitable? Because if they can't get profitable and survive, they can't do impact either. If I have the world's best solution to solve world hunger and I go out of business, I'm not solving world hunger. We look very carefully at the team, at the technology, the competitors, the market size, the go-to-market strategy, how to acquire customers, in addition to all the questions about the efficacy of their impact claims. Are they really having impact as they claim they might? Now, there was a young team that came to us and said, okay, we have some really cool tools for STEM education and labs in public schools. And we said, okay, first show us some evidence that you get better education outcomes than the other tools that are all being thrown at these schools. Secondly, convince us you know how to sell to schools, which is really hard, because if you don't know how to sell, there's no efficacy either.
Amanda, what are the type of information or data that investors request in order to sort of hedge the risk?
I think I'll go back to what you said. You're not afraid of risk, but what you want to do is just price it properly. You want to understand what it is and price it properly. So what companies need to do is provide that material information so that investors, like the ones in your network, can properly understand it. Well, how risky is this, and what kind of return do I want for that, accepting that risk? And when I say material information, what is that? You can look at it from two perspectives. There's one perspective, which is financially material. The SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, would say the threshold for that is, would a reasonable investor find this information important when they're deciding whether to buy or not? So we can look at that. That's the financially material information that you'll want to provide. On the other hand, you'll also want to look at what is ESG material. That's what we call it in our company, basically environmental, social, and governance material. What are those key topics that your stakeholders are interested in? And your stakeholders are, of course, your investors, very important, but it also could mean who are your potential clients, suppliers, your community members, maybe regulators, maybe your workforce, your potential employees, your current employees. So you also want to understand what are those key environmental, social, governance elements that are interesting to them. I think if you present that whole package, I think that will help clarify and make more transparent the risk that the investors are accepting, what kind of returns they need to accept like this.
And Victoria, your company does something called negative screening, which helps investors pick and choose their investment based on certain social priorities or values. Can you explain that? Because that also helps them, even though the risk might be something additional, at least they feel comfortable they're investing in the right things.
Sure. So one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is we may all have personal views or personal stances on certain issues, but it's not our job to put our views on the clients that come to us. So we sit down and we decide what are the values that are important to them, and they can choose. We have a list of probably 25 or so different screens that we do on an index. So like the S&P 500, as Amanda was saying, If someone comes and says, okay, we don't want tobacco, or we don't want gambling stocks, or whatever it may be, coal-oriented stocks, we have a process that we go through. We have services that provide us with information that ranks all these companies on these 3 variables that Amanda referenced, E for environmental, S for social, and G for governance. It ranks them on all of those. And we take those companies, we find kind of the worst offenders that are involved in those, and we screen those out. We also do revenue thresholds. So if tobacco happens to be a screen that someone wants to have on there, we have a revenue threshold where if a certain percentage of that company's revenues are generated from tobacco. So that can be a wide range of companies, right? People think no tobacco and they go, okay, that's just Philip Morris or Altria or something like that, but it's really not. Walmart is involved in that. Restaurants, if they sell cigars, they're involved in that. You even have to look at shipping companies. Who are their clients and how much of their revenue comes from shipping these products? So there's a huge, deep dive that goes in to finding out what names fit each screen, and then we screen those names out. That's a little different than impact investing, where you're looking at companies that are doing something positively towards something. We do a lot of our focus on the negative screening component, taking out companies that are offenders of that. One of the important things I just wanted to add real quick is when you're looking at risk, it's a little bit different. Bob is looking at risk on startups. We're looking at established companies that are in some of the major indices. The governance component that companies get rated on, we have found, not just us, but across the board in the industry, if a company ranks really high on governance, the risk is much less. Regardless of if you're looking for someone that has a mature content screen or an abortion screen or whatever it may be, if they have good governance, your risk of your total portfolio is going to come down. So that's a really key component for us when we're looking at risk. Look at the governance component of that.
And having good governance, a governance that can react quickly to the changes in the market, which is now the characteristic of the market. There's so much uncertainty, there's so much rapid change, that having good governance that can react and adapt quickly is the most important thing. But going back to the first note that I made, investors are looking to nominate members of board that have concerns on sustainability. We are going to touch on one of these questions. It's incredible to see how investors are requesting that the governance of the companies are changing, and are not so much focused on profit. Profit is now a small percentage, less than 30% of the other interests that they have. The recent reports have come that they want sustainability, they want members of the board that are concerned with the ecology, they are concerned also with political changes, more than profitability. Let's talk about indicators. There's a myriad of indicators that impact studies that define whether companies involved in impact behavior. Also, there is an exponential growth in the number of entrants into the business of collecting, aggregating, synthesizing, and ranking data. Environmental, social, governance rating agencies, ESG rating agencies may report based on different combinations of data, even going beyond company disclosures to include third-party information, and that is kind of controversial sometimes because this reporting goes beyond what the own company can control. These agencies that measure the data about companies on sustainability take data from everywhere, even from their social media places. So, in your experience, what data is useful to measure and report to investors in order to make decisions? And how is best to communicate that information to them? And Amanda, data measurement and communication is your expertise. I'd like you to start with that.
So I would say what to report. I'll go back to my last answer is that financially and ESG material information. That's what you would ideally want to start off with. Those are the most important things to your investors, to your stakeholders. And then the question becomes, how do you prevent? Do you follow one of these frameworks or answer one of these surveys? And this is one of the two key questions we actually help our clients answer all the time when we come up with a reporting strategy for them. And how we work through that is the first step. The first steps would be, what is your vision for this, for increasing transparency, for this disclosure? What are your long-term strategic goals for that? Once you've determined that, I think it's looking at where do you want to be among your peers, where do you want to be in the industry, and also you need to understand what constraints you have as well. And so once you have that foundation, that's when you can really start building out what we call a framework for decision making, about which surveys to answer, what frameworks to use, if any. The thing about being in the US is everything's voluntary right now, so you actually have this huge buffet to choose from. And so if you don't have this framework for decision making, you might make the wrong choice. And so how do you establish this kind of framework that guides you along, not just this year, but maybe 5 to 7 years down the road? I think those are the important things to think about. We never promote a specific framework or a specific survey. There are ones that are tailored towards different audiences, but we really like to start at what do you want at your company, what is your vision, what is your strategic goals, and how can you best communicate that out to your investors and other stakeholders.
Amanda's company performs the studies for companies, for established companies, so that they can communicate to the investors how they are making an impact. So these are established companies that are trying to show how they're making an impact. But you deal with companies that are startup. How do you measure that they are making an impact?
All right, so you know, these companies often are maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 employees total, and many of them don't yet have revenue to speak of, or just a little bit of revenue. So you know, no one's going to go to the trouble to do an ESG report on those companies. That's just not going to happen. So you know, what we look for first is, what is their primary business mission? Is it impact? You know, we've had companies come to us and say, well, we have this great recruiting tool that companies can use to recruit employees, and it can be used to recruit diverse employees, which is impactful. We say, well, that's not your primary business mission, meaning impact. So you know, it's not a good fit for us. But you know, in terms of, you know, we see environmental companies, the impact's usually kind of around CO2 footprint or conservation. On the social impact side, you know, it's really the question. The first kind of questions are, if they have a primary impact mission, how many people are you impacting, and how significant is the impact for each individual? You know, solving cancer for 3 people in the country with a $10 million drug is small impact in some sense. It's great for those 2 people. Doing a little bit of good for everybody is something, and solving world hunger for everyone is a huge impact, obviously, right? So, and there's also the question of, what are the unintended consequences of your mission? You know, Tom's Shoes has this great reputation of providing free shoes to people in the developing countries when you buy a pair of shoes in the U.S. Well, the stories I've heard is they put a lot of African shoemakers out of business. And so there can be unintended consequences, too, on the impact side that are important to consider. And so, you know, we ask the companies, we see companies generally work in the area of healthcare, education, environment, empowering disadvantaged groups. We don't have a tight screen of what we look for in impact companies. We ask them to can assess they're doing impact and define metrics they can use to describe impact. And sometimes it's very hard to do, because if you're helping the mental health of students in high school, what do you measure? You measure the number of students you interact with. You measure the improvement in their depression levels. I mean, that's very hard to measure. So it gets really tricky to try to figure out how you actually develop meaningful and easy to develop measurements.
Jamila, you advise investors directly. You help them with portfolios or select portfolios. What do investors, what kind of data investors look at to make decisions?
So as Bob pointed out, a lot of the time when we're looking at environmentally focused companies and technologies, CO2 obviated and water conserved are number 1 and number 2. But the interconnectedness of all of these sectors, whether it's water, energy, air, food, waste, chemicals, they provide additional wins that we don't always see. Additional wins and additional opportunities to create negative impact. You can't, get wins in one sector by sacrificing other sectors. A positive maybe direction would be if you take an agriculture company that has a new farming practice and they allow for resource efficiency. You can get the same yield or better yields with less water, less fertilizer, less energy inputs. Not only are you kind of satisfying this increased yield with decreased resources, but you're also improving water and energy. You're hitting multiple sectors at the same time. If you look at runoff, that goes to a wastewater treatment plant, there's energy associated with that. So, you kind of have to drive yourself through the supply chain because those wins along the supply chain are not small. And it's important to quantify because it can also kind of help you isolate areas where maybe you sacrificed. A lot of times this kind of interconnectedness between water and energy isn't very clear. But, we can say, oh, we use so much less water, but we require, mountains and mountains and more energy. Urban farming is a great example of where we can kind of see this trade-off. And understanding those connections is really important to us as investors, and remembering that we can't look at anything in a silo. Nothing exists by itself, especially in this world. And social good is a great example of where it connects into the environment, particularly as it relates to climate change. Those communities that are most going to be impacted by the changing climate are underserved in developing nations. And so how do we kind of satisfy those goals while serving our environmental purposes and our number one goal, which is profitability?
Do you think that your investors are familiar with the concept of the interconnectedness between energy, water, poverty, and food? Or you have to explain that to them when you explain the portfolio?
Water and energy is a lot more widely known, especially here in Houston. But I think, it's not always clear that these connect to a wider nexus that includes all of these kind of missions. CO2, we hear about CO2 by itself. But CO2 doesn't exist alone. That's directly connected to human health. We use CO2 equivalents, but we're talking about all sorts of greenhouse gases, and those are directly impacted to human health. And so, yes and no. Yes, investors are familiar with kind of the first class of water and energy and maybe how that's impacting poverty, but it's much wider than that. And I think the social development goals kind of really drive that and interconnectedness, and you can see the connections between all of these sectors very clear from those SDGs.
Yeah, for those not familiar with development, you can't have water without energy because you need to pump the water. You can't have crops and agriculture without water. And you can't have food without agriculture. So they are all interconnected. That's the nexus that Jamila is very passionate about communicating that nexus to investors too. And Victoria, what kind of data do your investors need to make decisions when?
So for us as portfolio managers, when we're looking at what to put in a portfolio, when there's certain screens that are going to be placed on it, as Amanda was mentioning, it's voluntary here in the U.S. And so it's quite difficult to go and dig into every company in the Russell 3000 index and try to figure out these scores. So we do have third parties that provide us with ranking information on companies, depending on whether it's environmental, social, or governance, and they rank those for us. We then also do our own research into these companies as well, because you just can't get everything from one source. MSCI is a source that we use, ESRB, and if someone asked me what the acronyms stand for, I don't know if I would even be able to tell you, but so we have many different sources, but we know it's difficult. Even Bloomberg, I'm sure almost everyone is familiar with Bloomberg, they reached out to us because they're trying to figure out how can they start a program to look at companies, to rank them on these ESG or SRI variables, and they're having trouble doing it, and they kind of want to know how we're approaching it. So there's a lot that goes into it. Just really quickly, I will say, years ago, one of our equity portfolio managers, when we started, we have a family of funds, the steward funds, that all have socially responsible screens on them. And we used to be able to call pharmaceutical companies and say, can I talk to someone in your research department? And ask them questions, because people are concerned with stem cell research, with the use of these different kinds of things for pharmaceuticals. That's kind of where a lot of it started. And you could talk to someone in the lab and they would just tell you. what they do. I mean, now you can't even get past the front desk. If you call somebody, I mean, it's no possible way to be able to get that kind of granular information anymore on your own. So it is voluntary, which I think, am I correct that Europe has a lot more rules and regulations in place, right? And I would assume at some point we will start making our way towards that. I'm not sure how companies will feel about that. You probably have a better feel on that than I do, but lots of different sources coming together to try to make a bigger picture.
Yes.
I wanted to add one more thing. Talking about measurement and anticipating having future impact results that you can measure. There's a lot of metrics you use to look at a business, how competitive they will be long term, what's their efficiency in finding customers. Well, if in the impact space, there's often many people trying to solve the same impact problem, startups. And so, one of the relevant questions is, for this impact company versus this one trying to solve the same problem, who has better sales efficiency, who has a longer term competitive advantage somehow, because the one that's better there, if you start a business question sounding, will have longer impact and impact in the industry, in the world. And so the future measurements will look a lot better for those who have competitive advantages today.
Yes, that's key. I want to share with you a recent report from Institutional Shareholder Services. This is what I was talking about 2 minutes ago, how shareholders share their preferences when voting for boards. It shows that environmental and social issues outnumber governance concern. At the top are climate change or the environment, sustainability, political activities, human rights, and human capital. So they prefer board members that have skills in those areas. In your experience, what are the most popular impact themes, and where do you see the trend evolving into? Jamila, you specialize in environmental energy efficiency investments, and I'd like you to start with, you touch on the nexus with water, health, and food, and that's one of the themes that are going. Do you see other things coming up other than just climate change and environment? And
I think, when we use the term climate change, it turns a lot of people off. They don't like to hear that. But it doesn't have to be so. We're really talking about sustainable investment, not just from a climate change perspective, but really, investments that will stand the test of time. And what are the problems that we're going to face, whether or not, you think climate change is an issue. The growing population, for example, is a major one. And as you mentioned, the food, water, energy nexus is a big one. The food requirements in the next several decades will double in this world. So how do we satisfy kind of those needs while balancing what our resources look like? And I've seen a lot of activity around agriculture efficiency, whatever you might call it, increasing those yields, whether they're domestic applications or international applications. Other than that, certainly energy, whether renewable or improved avenues and additional technologies. Those have been very active. Water has always been a challenging sector, and I think as we get behind this interconnectedness of, as I mentioned, energy and water, the importance of water and our freshwater resources are becoming more and more important. There's a direct link with water and sanitation. That's also one of the Sustainable Development Goals internationally. People don't have access to clean water because they don't have access to clean sanitation. And that's directly impacted for childhood morbidity and mortality. So how do we kind of satisfy all of these kind of goals at the same time? I've seen some technology that get behind it, but again, water is a uniquely challenging sector, domestically and internationally, because of, it's a necessity for human life, but it's also a commodity. So how do you kind of balance that? So I still do think climate change is a primary concern, but the sustainability behind climate change means it's much more than just CO2 emissions.
right, yes, climate change affects the poor more than the developed world, because whenever there is a change in climate, and the poor is so dependent on the agribusiness and the crops and raising their own food, that when the climate changes their environment, they may have to immigrate, move, and start their lives somewhere else. So climate change also affects the availability of water, and like Jamila said, the availability of water is crucial, and clean water is crucial for sanitation and health, and non-propagation of diseases. So climate change in a certain way drives the sustainability dialogue. However, there are other sustainability themes that you address, and they are very different because most of your companies are based here in the United States. What is the trend in terms of interest from investors in sustainability themes?
So, that's a great question, and I don't have a good answer, I suppose, but when Tess gave the keynote speech, I was just kind of impressed by how people think about these global frameworks of, what are the global changes, what are the big sectors, what are the technology changes. At least my own personality, sort of our angel network, we don't think that globally. We kind of say, hey, is this company going to make it? Can they do impact? Let's go invest in them. So that's a little more of how we think. We have been a little hesitant to invest in companies which are located overseas and we don't understand the laws and the currency issues. We are looking closely right now at a company that is working to improve power reliability in Nigeria. It's a U.S. company that could be very good chance of being funded by us. And that's kind of our international foray so far.
Amanda, what are the indicators that companies are asking you to produce? What is the trend? What are investors looking for?
I think what we'll see from our institutional group of, let's say, ESG investing, going back to the ISS report, I think what we'll continue to see is a focus on two areas in addition to climate change, would be gender diversity and then political activity, specifically in regards to membership in trade or industry associations. Gender diversity, because we see it's been demonstrated that that creates alpha across all sectors. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. So they're interested in seeing on the board, in executive management, in the workforce, your gender diversity. I think the second thing is, again, political activity, specifically membership in trade or industry associations. Investors have gone smart that they, through a few key companies, can actually impact the entire industry. And we can take a recent example from the oil and gas industry where shareholders, through their engagement with Royal Dutch Shell, was able to basically influence huge organizations like the American Petroleum Institute, API, which is the main lobbying and industry association for oil and gas producers, let's say, in the U.S. And so through these kind of key companies who have giant seats at the table, these associations, they figured out that they can actually impact much more. So I think those are two things we'll see, in addition to, of course, climate change. I think is the big element.
Political component, how politically connected they are, the members of the board are. This is something new too. How can they, at a higher level, impact the whole industry? Is something very important to investors.
I mean, what we're seeing is that the companies were saying, okay, I understand you're concerned about climate change, we're taking these actions, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, they're giving money to this association, sending lobbyists to Congress, to the regulators, and trying to get, and successfully lobbying for lower, more relaxed regulation. So it's this duplicity that investors are smart to, and they're also saying, no, we're going to cut that out, or we're going to actually find a way to influence the big industry through these key players.
Victoria, your investors are not so much, are very special because it's more focused on values than on impact. Can you explain what values are they interested in?
Sure. So when we scan investors in general across all age groups, the top three concerns that we have from our investors, one actually kind of surprised us. We thought climate change would have been first. It actually wasn't. It came in third, along with being carbon neutral. First was healthy living. They wanted to screen out companies that were working against that goal. And we actually think a lot of that comes from the fact that headlines right now are all about how are we going to fund some of the entitlement programs that we have in the country, right? Whether it's Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. And so I think people are becoming more and more concerned and want to support companies that are working towards helping people live healthier lives. So healthy living was number one. Second was faith-based values. We have a large amount of clients on the institutional side of our business that are religious. So a lot of Catholic endowments that are with us. We have some from all different lines of faith, and that's very important to them. We actually spoke the other day, and I was telling her that the bishop's letter kind of guides a lot of the Catholic institutions that come to us for investments, but it's interesting to us how each one interprets it a little bit differently. So whereas one group may want to screen something in particular, another group will say, well, yes, but let's do a shift and do something a little bit different. So it's very centric to the individual investor as to what they're looking for on the value side. But those are the three things that are most highly asked for: healthy living, faith-based values, and then carbon neutral or climate change.
That's fascinating across the board. So we're going to take some questions from the audience. Some of you already sent questions when you registered, and I took some of those questions. We will start with that while I look at my phone and get new questions. Let's see if we're already in time. We have 10 minutes, not a lot. But one of the questions was, how are virtual impact investment platforms changing the long-term investment game for the younger generation? And Victoria, you had something good to say about that.
So I think what the question is asking when it's talking about virtual investments, I'm assuming they mean robo-advisors. So you can go online, put in your information, and voila, you have this perfect portfolio for you. You lose so much of the interaction with someone when you do that. And the interaction is really important when you're talking about this type of investment, a values-based investment, an SRI, an ESG investment. So much of that comes down to behavioral finance. It is a whole world of its own now, behavioral investing and behavioral finance. It has really developed in the last 10, 15 years, where you really have to sit down and find out what people's goals are and what's important to them. It is not always making the most money that is most important, even though we talked about we have to be profitable, right? Companies have to be profitable. But as an investor, sometimes that's not the number one goal. You need to meet your needs, but there's also this whole values component that goes along with that. You miss that when you do something with a robo-advisor, and in our study we actually found that almost 70% of investors said they still want to talk to people in person about these types of investment decisions that they're making. So you lose a component, not that it doesn't work for some people, but I think if you have more factors in your decision making than just, do I want to be in stocks or bonds, then it helps to have an individual to discuss that with.
So another thing that's happened is that to invest in a private company, government's required you have a certain amount of personal wealth, because then you're informed enough to make a decision and take the risks. But the Job Act a few years ago allows non-accredited, lower income investors to make small investments in private companies like startups. And so that's a new development that can allow millennials to start to invest in some startup companies that are in the impact space. There's also some new IRA companies like Rocket Dollar to allow you to direct your IRA part of your portfolio into startup companies. That's a new development also that gives millennials a chance to go into specific companies they're interested in.
Millennials are changing the way we need. So like millennials. How can we contribute to make impact investing more effective and mainstream, and how do we encourage major industries to contribute and support sustainable environment initiatives? Bob, when I asked you this question, you said just spoke with your pocket. Can you expand on that?
Well, if there's companies that you think are, going back to ESG kind of considerations, if you identify the companies that have good ESG scores, buy their products. You don't buy the products of those who aren't. And if you're doing public investments, again, follow the ESGs, and you maybe get involved with some of the shareholder motions and voting for those. And that's a way that anyone can get involved with helping to move public companies in the right direction.
Can I add to that? I want to say definitely vote with your purchasing dollars, with your shares. If you are a shareholder, make sure you're voting your shares at the annual meeting. On top of that, also engage. Email them, call them, post, tweet, whatever your form of communication is, because they want to hear from you. Why are you voting this way? Why are you making your purchasing decision this way? And then if at your own company, I would say do two things. One, why not start or support an initiative, a pilot at your company? And then number two, if your company does offer a 401k, do you have an ESG investment option? If not, ask for that.
And I recently heard, that 85% of public companies now have someone on staff, maybe a marketing person, who's building the ESG, CSR story. And, it's sort of a trend that's coming, and just supporting that kind of trend is helpful.
Jamila, I think you had something.
In addition to what Bob and Amanda mentioned, engaging with your local community can do a lot. I'm from the West Coast, but when I moved here in Houston, one of the things that stuck out to me was recycling doesn't exist in all neighborhoods. and that is unfortunate and honestly in this day and age unacceptable. So we can make that change. And not only that, informing folks, educating yourselves on what you can put in the recycling bin. Kids in Europe know better than we do. Even myself sometimes I have to Google, can I put this in the bin? Piece of advice, you cannot put a pizza box in the recycling bin. If you walk away with something today, that's what it is. But there are many such things. You can't put plastic bags in the recycling bin. I've heard entire lots of recycling get rejected because the amount of contaminants there were too high, and plastic bags are usually the number one thing. I've been to a recycling plant, it's actual manual labor separating these pieces. If you don't know what to do with it, trash it, don't recycle it. So engaging with your community, and recycling is just one such suggestion, but engaging with your community, water saving practices, irrigating your lawn. I live in the Woodlands, we get an email every week telling us whether we should irrigate or not. This is just a small kind of tidbit, but these can have a much bigger impact if we all did something in our neighborhood.
You ready on me to say something?
Yes, you have to. No, we can move to the next question.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, from an investor perspective, I think the answer from my end takes us all the way back to the very first question you asked, and it comes down to education. We strive so hard to educate our investors. We talked about how they don't realize that you don't have to give up performance to make an impact with your portfolio. They don't understand that these investments are even available to them. So we work with advisors, we work with clients to really try to educate them. Go out and do it yourself. You can go to our website if you want. You go to any website. Once you do a Google search and find out what's out there, because your dollars do speak volumes. And so whether it's buying a product or whether it's investing in a company, the education is key for people to know.
I have 2 more questions, if we have time. Yeah, 2 more minutes. What is the greatest concern for the world in the coming years? Is there a tremendous amount of global uncertainty and risk that are interconnected? So, Amanda, you
I would say, yes, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty and global risk, and where I get energy from, and where I suggest is more interesting perspective to explore is really, what are those solutions? So get to it, everyone, because there are a lot. And so I think that's where we should spend our time and energy, basically. Let's focus on what needs to be done, how can we resolve those problems, and spend our energy there. That's where I would suggest to go. Yes, I think I'm perfect for a startup.
One more, I think this is very important because we touched briefly on that, but with innovations in agriculture and energy, so climate change models attempt to extrapolate the positive effects.
You'll find a way.
Yeah, that's your expertise.
Positive effects of
with innovations in agriculture and energy, the climate change models attempt to extrapolate the positive effects of those innovations in agriculture and energy. We're becoming more efficient in everything, becoming more efficient in energy, in the way we do agriculture, etc. Do the climate change models take that into account, efficiency?
At the current rate of adoption, no, we're not making enough of an impact. So we need to see those go much further for us, our global climate change models, to kind of notice that difference. And so yes, they do account for that, but I don't think the impact yet is enough adoption across the board.
Well, I think that we need to give a few minutes for everybody to relax.
Can I
Thank
just
you
make
so
one last
much.
closing?
Yes,
A little self-advertisement.
yes.
So, angel investing is, I mentioned all the risks involved, but, as long as you can allocate a small portion of your assets to that asset class, it's a fun thing to do. It's a social thing to do because you're part of a team that's looking at all these companies together, and we are focused on impact. So if anyone would like to talk about angel investing, I'd be glad to chat with you after this.